So let me pin. Now you should see the screen.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And here you should see when we start other speakers and also the moderator. Okay, we are about to start.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session, which is dedicated to clean energy for all. Opportunities of cooperation in the MENA region on this. We know that Middle East and North Africa are among the most vulnerable regions in the world to climate change. Climate change is not just an increase in temperature, it's extreme weather, it's tragic droughts, it's floods, it's water stress on one of the most scarce resource in the area. So we know that there's a nexus, there's a relation between risk and conflicts and climate change, but there's also an opportunity. And opportunities that tackling climate change with energy transition, cooperation in the area can be improved. What's the best approach? To increase investments in decarbonization. What's the best approach to steer the dialogue between producing and consuming countries in the direction of net zero for the future? We're delighted to have a very high level lineup of speakers here in Rome. We have Minister of Water Resources of the government of Iraq, Mahdi Rashad Al-Hamdani. Welcome, ministers. And we have in connection from remote Muawiyah Khaled Mohammed Aradaida, who's Minister of the Environment in Jordan. And we also have Leila Ben Ali, who's Minister of Energetic Transition and Sustainable Development of Morocco. Again, here in Rome, welcome to Francesco La Camera, Director General of IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and Joe McMonigal, who's Secretary General of the International Energy Fund. Again, virtually connected, Mary Burrs-Warlick, welcome, Deputy Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. So we're ready to go, and Minister, I would like to start with you. But first, I want to remind everyone here and in streaming that you will have to use your earpieces for simultaneous translation. So, Minister, let me start with you. We know that climate change has a profound impact in the region and also for Iraq, and water scarcity is endangered in a very, very high way from what's happening. We know that in summer, the drought created troubles. And what's your position in terms of what's the best approach? And do you think that energy transition could also create opportunities of cooperation in the area and not just risks?
شكرا جزيلا حقيقة بداية.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Italian Foreign Ministry for this invitation and for Iraqi participation in this panel. Climate change that is happening nowadays, it's not something new, but when it goes on for 3 seasons one after the other, it will lead us to big problems like the lack of water, as happened in Iraq.
دولة مصب
And
لأنه
we are speaking about a country that is very big. So when we see this kind of climate change with this scarcity of rain, we will see immediately the effects of this on the agriculture, on the livelihood of the citizen. So this implication needs new laws, and it's a very difficult, it's a very difficult task for our government and for the water ministry. It's not like only about water, it's something that involves the whole country. So we have to see what are the international standards and agreements in order to find best way how to
مساعدة العراق من
use
حقها
our stores in order to help Iraq, in order to have new programs, in order to preserve our waters. And Iraq should think about its own interest, and our citizens needs to live their lives and to use our water and to use their sovereignty on this. So sometimes climate change could lead to conflict. This conflict maybe it's related to the people working in agricultural field, because it's very important for most. This is an important sector for most of our citizens, and we have some cultures and that are related to agriculture, and our way of our agriculture. It's very difficult to change in order to adapt to the climate change. So we need to impose the will of the state, of the government, about the use of water in agricultural sector, and we need not to compel with the will of our agricultural sector workers. So this kind of changes. So we need. So we see that within our country, a very different situation in different reasons, and this needs a better governance. So we are working on this in Iraq to have new laws and new regulation for this sector in order to
وهذه طبيعية
help
جدا
with this. So these conflicts are natural, because we see that the need of our citizens for water is very this is very important. So the government is asked to find solutions for water, for drinking water, and for agricultural worker. But while the climate change is going on, and this is a problem for the whole world, we see that in some parts we see a huge amount of huracanos and rain. In our area, it's completely different, and but we need to work together to change the situation in Iraq, because till now we don't have international agreement that works on the redistribution of water. And we know that water is,
في الحدود
and we know that rivers are not, the rivers doesn't know about and doesn't respect the borders. And we see the citizens in Iran, in Iraq, every citizen just think that has the right to use all the water of its country. He feels that this right is its own right, but water doesn't know the borders. So we think that an international agreement about this will give us a better way for cooperation about the use of water, and to limit the conflict about water, because we are speaking even about historical conflicts, and we see that people that works in agricultural field usually are very simple people. if they don't have the water for their work, they want from the government something to just have a better situation in the
and that was
work.
happening.
Thank you so much.
We saw happening in the summer. Now, let me ask the same question to the Jordan Minister of Environment. Daida, we just heard about the needs of a new pact, of a new regulation, of a new framework to manage the scarce resources and to manage energy transition as a source of cooperation.
فكيف يمكننا أن نستخدم هذا الانتقال الطاقي كفرصة وليس كصراع؟ فالأردن عليها.
So having the right approach to this can be vital for the future. What's your take on this discussion, Minister?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me. And we're seeing climate change impacts in Jordan firsthand. As you mentioned earlier, the Middle East is slated to see a sharp increase in witnessing these kinds of impacts. Some scientists say it'll be upwards of 20% more than the rest of the world. Those types of impacts that we are seeing in Jordan are having their effect on the energy demands and the water demands and our agricultural sector and many other sectors as well. So when it comes to the energy demand, with those heat waves that we're seeing globally, we're actually seeing those in Jordan. The dry seasons are getting drier and the wet seasons are getting more wet. So with those heat waves, there's an increase in demand on cooling and in terms of number of units and hours of operation. And those are having an economic impact on the end users. The water extraction, treatment, and conveyance is becoming more expensive. Agricultural production and logistics are getting affected. And also, when it comes to the water demand, as you know, Jordan is the second water poorest country in the world. Used to be the fourth, but now with nearly 15% increase in population over the past decade alone, due to the waves of refugees that Jordan has witnessed. This has caused, and during one of the most difficult economic times for Jordan and overstretched resources in Jordan's history. So that has led to an exacerbation of the impacts of climate change on Jordan. When it comes to the water resources, we're looking at about 90 cubic meters per capita per year. And if we continue with the types of resources that we are having now, with the reduced precipitation and depleting ground water aquifers, and also the transboundary water issues that we're having, we're looking at about 40 to 50 cubic meters per capita per year in 2040 if we don't tap into new resources. Our industries, there's an increased activity in our industrial sector to meet local and regional demand, and that also has an impact on the energy and water demand. And I mentioned earlier, the agricultural sector is getting affected. So there's more attention that needs to be paid to the water, energy, food nexus. We need to balance this equation very well. It's a very fine balance when you have limited water resources. And His Majesty King Abdullah II talks often about not just food security for Jordan, but food complementarity. So how can we work across borders to make sure that production of food is done in a smart way, so that we can work together and work closely together. So we have to look at what do we grow in the different countries and how to grow it and when and where to grow it, and then the cost associated with that and transferring of the produce. So all of these things have to be looked at in a comprehensive and regional way as well.
Yeah, sure. And Minister, I will get back to you to understand if you see any progress in the dialogue and cooperation in the area at this level, or what the agenda might be looking at the future. But with this, I would like to move also to Leila Ben Ali, who's Minister of Sustainability and Energetic Transition in Morocco. Thanks for joining us today, Minister. And we are talking about cooperation, but the energy transition is reshaping also international relations, geopolitics. What do you think will be the impact on Morocco's relation with the EU on one hand and other regional countries and powers in the future?
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity, and I would like to thank it's Italian delegation for organizing this. Well, I mean, before getting into the heated subject of the geopolitical relationships and the regional relationships, I think it's quite important to understand a bit more what we mean by ambitious renewable targets and sustainable development. I mean, as you know, this ministry that I have the pleasure of heading now has changed its name, but it's also in spirit being what was historically being the energy and mining sector, and helping them in that transition towards the 21st century, and also linking a sustainable development angle into it. So it's really, in Morocco, it's really a reality on the ground. And I think that's point number one that people need to grasp, is that it's really, it has been, the investment that the country took over the last 2 decades is now paying off, because we reached the target of 40% of our energy mix based on the renewables, and we want to exceed our original target that was set by His Majesty the King Mohammed VI, to exceed the 52% of the energy mix by 2030. But beyond the numbers, I think it's quite important to say what we mean, what we need in terms of regional and international cooperation. So today we have roughly 50 renewable energy projects on the ground, up and running, around 4,000 megawatts that are already in service. That's roughly 40% of the electricity mix, and 20% of today's demand in electricity. But we also have 60 projects that are in the pipeline, being developed or implemented with our international partners from the EU and also outside of the EU. That is not enough. I mean, I think we want to exceed our 52% target of renewables. I think we need more than those 60 projects that are on the pipeline. So what does that mean? It means that our energy strategy has to be flexible. And among the 7 pillars that we have in our energy strategy, I will cite only 3 of them. One is indeed openness to the private sector, and I think Morocco has roughly 10 years of advance in terms of the regulatory framework to welcome private investors, international and local, in energy projects, particularly those that are low carbon or green. Industrial integration is the second pillar that I want to mention, and the third one is indeed a balanced international cooperation. So from now on those 60 plus projects that we want to develop, I think one of the area that we want our international partners to work with us on is the return on capital employed. The return on capital employed on those projects have to improve. And when we talk about capital, like my colleagues from Iraq and Jordan, we view capital in its wider sense. It's not only financial capital, it's also your natural capital and your human capital as well. The way we use land, the way we use water in those projects have to be done in a proper way. So our transition towards a low carbon model will take those aspects into account. The other point that I want to finish on, to get back to your original question, is, as our friend, our minister of Iraq mentioned, water does not know frontiers. Well, greenhouse gas emissions neither. So in order to be able to help in that energy transition, and particularly away from coal, which is a large share of our electricity mix today, we don't see that. We really see that as part of a regional and international dialogue, particularly with our EU partners. So as you know, we are quite progressive in our diversification strategy in terms of gas supplies, because we think that gas, whether we think it's a bridging fuel or destination fuel, at the end of the day, that's not the point. The point is that we need to optimize our regional gas infrastructure to enable this transition away from coal, if we are serious about this transition, because of the same argument that my Iraqi counterpart used, greenhouse gas emissions do not know any frontier. Thank you.
On this, Minister, just in a word, because I have to move over to the other speakers, but you spoke in Glasgow, COP26. The outcome of that is disappointing, satisfying? Are you happy with that or not? What do you think of that?
I don't think it's a question of feelings, what we view about Glasgow in the previous COPs. And I remind you that Morocco has hosted the COP22 in Marrakesh a few years ago. So we see a continuity definitely since 1992 and 2016, where we had Marrakesh. And then in 2021, where we have Glasgow, a pandemic, and some geopolitical issues related to the role of natural gas in the energy transition. So taking all that into account, I think the outcome of Glasgow was a balanced outcome for in the discussions between developed countries and countries in development. And I think there was a step in the right direction in one of the concerns, for example, related to the deployment of the package of the $100 million per year to finance
a balanced outcome. Okay, that's your word. Thank you so much. Now I ask the same question to Mary Burrows-Warlick, Deputy Executive Director at the International Energy Agency. Welcome, thanks for joining us. And let me start with this, because we were just speaking about Glasgow, and we know that also in a technical note of your agency during Glasgow, you reminded us that even all the government pledges were respected, we would fall short of reducing the impact on climate change and more specifically increase in global temperature. So we are looking to 2050 or 2070, and it's very ambitious. How can we get there, and how cooperation also in the Mediterranean area we're discussing today can increase and accelerate this?
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you. And I'll try to touch briefly on all the points that you've just asked about. I really do have to agree with the minister's overall assessment. I think in many respects, we would absolutely agree that important progress was achieved at Glasgow in a number of areas, which I'll just touch on briefly. Certainly in terms of commitments, in terms of additional international collaboration efforts, and also key elements of the Paris Agreement rulebook. And in terms of commitments, we now see that countries that account for 90% of the global economy have now made ambitious commitments to reduce emissions to net zero. This is significant progress. We recognize that these are commitments and that what needs to follow next is action and implementation, which is absolutely key. But there has been, and clearly, a rising level of ambition and recognition of what needs to be done to address the climate challenge. On a multilateral basis, just to name one example, the Global Methane Pledge was very significant from our perspective, with over 100 countries joining it. And again, if implemented, can make a significant difference, we believe, in terms of near-term warming. And our own analysis shows that if these commitments are met on time and in full, it could limit global warming by the end of the century to 1.8 degrees Celsius. Now, that doesn't get us completely on track to the 1.5 degrees, but it does show a significant step forward in terms of ambition. And in terms of collaboration, which the IEA certainly feels is very important in terms of driving progress on the clean energy transition, let me just mention two important examples. One, the US-China Joint Declaration, and a really important statement from our perspective in sending the right signal of cooperation and commitment on part of the world's two biggest economies. So important leadership there. Second, again, just one example of many more, the Just Energy Transition partnership with South Africa, with France, Germany, the UK, and the US announcing a package of $8.5 billion to accelerate the phasing out of coal in South Africa. And a third area, as I mentioned, is the rules. A major task at COP26 was to agree on elements of the Paris rule book and to move those and to agree on how to implement different aspects of the Paris Agreement. And now you asked about the big challenge, which has to do with, you know, are we going to get there and how are we going to get there? And let me just touch on a couple of things briefly there. Two major things are very important from our perspective. One is making investments in high emitting sectors such as coal unattractive. And I think that is clearly an area where new commitments are being made. And second, vitally important is ramping up clean energy investment. So, you know, important commitments, signals have been made, but governments really have to find the right market structures and incentives to attract enough investment. And by our calculation, clean energy investments need to ramp up fourfold by the end of the decade to keep 1.5 degrees alive. And this is a huge number, from less than 1 trillion today to 4 trillion by 2030. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. We see via the tracking work we're doing on our sustainable recovery tracker that governments are spending more on clean energy, but there's much more that needs to be done, because only something like 40% of the figure I just mentioned will be put forward by 2050 to achieve net zero goals. And let me just mention one area of importance, and that is changing regulatory regimes to really attract and mobilize the clean energy innovation and investment. Governments need to remove red tape more to attract this investment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Mary Burst Warlick. And you just hit one crucial point, because we know that if we are talking about 4 billion investments in the future in clean energy, trillion, but the cost of the capital for those investments in emerging economies and in the MENA region can get to 7-fold the cost of capital for developed markets. And this is due to a lack of confidence in investors in the regulatory framework of those countries. So I know there's an initiative underway to accelerate the reform of the regulatory framework, which apparently is one of the most dangerous restraints to this movement. But we are talking clean energy, we're talking renewables, Francesco La Camera. So even though renewables are under the spotlight in general, but some says that, you know, the contribution of renewables to this transition is still too small, and it's growing too slowly to the targets we are having. And more specifically, in the MENA region, there are countries that today discovered that they have a huge potential in renewables energy. Where are we in your view?
My first reaction to this question is could require a long time for answering. I would like to be short in mine. Just let us think that almost 10 years ago, there were many that were saying that the future of power was on coal. 5 years ago, when we were fighting for the Paris Agreement, still there was people insisting that the future of power was on gas, oil, and coal. Let us definitely think that what was a niche 10 years ago, a dream of dreamers, something was not really becoming feasible or economically viable, renewables, now are at the heart, at the core of any strategy that has been presented in Glasgow. This is a dramatic change in the culture and the approach. In my point of view, it's very clear that the future energy system will be based on renewables. Now, no one will say that is not the truth. And the renewables be complemented by hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, and sustainable biomass. So this is where we are going. And renewables are playing their role in the respect. But what is not yet there is the scale and the speed of this transformation. Time is the most important variable. And we have insisted in our World Energy Transition Outlook on what we call the technology avenues, insisting that the major efforts that has to be done in this decade is on the technologies that may provide the results we need. All agree also, just to mention the new role of US administration engagement in the Biden summit, everyone say that the next decade, so this decade, the next 9 years, will tell us if we'll be able at the end to be in line or not with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So first of all, any technologies that cannot produce results in this decade has not to be considered. So this means how important is renewable. If today we want to invest in renewables, it means that we can put electricity in the grid in 1 year or less. This is the magic of renewables, that we can get soon the result that we need. And for getting here, we are very clear, we need to triple the investment in renewables each year. We are assisting the trend last year, also in the year of the pandemic, the other capacity of renewables was increasing, I think, 260 gigawatts, so 50% more than the previous year. Probably this year, still we are going to have a trend in looking too high, but we are not yet there. And if you don't triple the investment this year, means the next year we have to do triple, something else. If we don't do this in the next year, we'll say 4 times. So we are running against time. And in this, renewables, again, is the only technologies that can provide us to give result. And I want to be brief to help your work, Andrea, and say that also important, where we are reacting to the pandemic. No? What is all the government wants? Want jobs, want to increase GDP. And we know that only technologies that can give answer in the time we require is renewables. We have made clear that the next 3 years we can provide for 5.5 million jobs, invest in the energy transition. We increase GDP by 1.1. So really the future is saying we have to run, and we know the technologies that can give us results in the time that we need.
Well, Joe McMoneagle, MED is a dialogue forum for the MENA region. The idea is to promote a positive agenda. And since the beginning of this meeting, energy has been at the center as a potential common good to create bridges among countries. But we know that there are bridges, but there are also conflicts on those lines, potential or real conflicts. And your organization represents consumer and producer countries. So what's your sense of the energy transition impact on the relation among these countries? And can this cooperation be the real future?
Well, first, let me say it's great to be back in Rome and be here in person. I participated virtually with you and my other colleagues last year, but also to be here because it's where the G20 leaders met. And in that communique, they tasked the IEF, recognizing that Europe and most of the world are in the midst of an energy crisis. They tasked the IEF with to facilitate an intense producer-consumer dialogue on the energy security question, but at the same time, how do we keep pushing along on the energy transition? And the IEF is doing just that. We've launched a series of initiatives for which I must thank Her Excellency, the Minister of Morocco, because she was formerly the chief economist at the IEF and helped us launch many of these initiatives. So we had already launched a series of these, but we'll do more in the year ahead. All during the pandemic, there was a saying in the Middle East that you kept hearing over and over again, and it went like this: with hardship comes ease. Let's hope there will be some ease coming, inshallah, as they would say in the US or in the Middle East. But the hardship has certainly been felt by the pandemic, and also very much so in energy markets. And Certainly in Europe and Asia, they're in the midst of high prices and volatility, as you pointed out. And this is mainly or primarily caused by the impact from the pandemic on investment in new supplies. And I think it's important. I totally agree with the comments of all of my colleagues here. We have to keep making progress on renewable deployment and other clean technologies. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we have the investment in hydrocarbons to power the world economy today. Unfortunately, the pandemic has cut investment in hydrocarbons in 2020 by about 35%. And this year, we're updating our investment report. We think it'll be another 25% versus pre-pandemic levels. So 2 years in a row of CapEx cuts in new upstream development, keeping in mind that you have to invest just to keep production, current, let alone to meet future growth. So 2 years in a row, right now we're dealing with higher prices and volatility because of demand surged back so quickly. But the next several years, we're going to see higher prices and volatility unless we start paying attention to investment in hydrocarbons. And I must say, the thing I'm most worried about is high prices and volatility undermining public support for climate action.
Right.
Because once we lose that, it's so difficult to get back.
That's what families and firms are already experiencing with the high energy bills and costs that they are paying currently and probably also in the future. So let me get back to Leila Benali that was just mentioned by Joe here. And because the question is this, here at MET, we are discussing how energy transition can create cooperation opportunities, but we cannot hide that also energy can be weaponized. For example, at the end of October, Algeria stopped pumping gas through a pipeline through Morocco to Europe. And this is another show that there's a tension behind that. So how do you see the potential for cooperation at the same time when things like that are still happening?
Thank you very much. And thanks to Joe for his little mention of our souvenir of common projects. Well, I mean, I think it's not that actually a tricky question in a sense that's why I finished my earlier remarks when I talked about regional cooperation, which is a third pillar in our energy strategy. And I would say in any energy strategy is because I've seen throughout my experience, but also in my personal experience over the last couple of months, that what could be viewed as a crisis can actually also be a blessing in disguise. So I think it's the right time to use that opportunity to basically streamline our energy strategy and make it as flexible as possible. So a few things like diversifying your portfolio of suppliers, where there you go, you have an exact case of the need to diversify your portfolio of players and suppliers. Things like a flexible energy strategy, where there you go, you have to make sure that your energy mix as a whole is not balanced towards one technology over the other. And I think the point that Joe made about investments in oil and gas and fossil fuels in general is quite key, because we want to position ourselves once you have those 2 years in a row of cutting in CapEx, that will have a direct impact on prices, whether we like it or not. And so from that perspective, we want to ensure that we are ready once we are at the end of this cycle, if we believe in the cyclical nature of the industry, that our infrastructure is ready to enable to have enough supplies to play for the intermittency of renewables, but at the same time prepare for the ambitions that we have in terms of hydrogen. Morocco is also positioning itself as a key player in hydrogen, and that's not a secret now. It's public knowledge that we have a roadmap to deploy our renewable resources to capture the future hydrogen market. So from that perspective, I think it's quite important that we stay the course and we plan our strategy. And last week I was able to provide an interview where I detailed our energy strategy in 3 episodes, where we see in the short term a key role for regional cooperation, not only with Spain, but also with Portugal and some of our friends and the European Union to be able to monetize and optimize our energy infrastructure. So we are pushing that on the gas infrastructure, but we're also pushing ahead with additional interconnections with the Spanish market, but also with the Portuguese market. There's a study that we are finishing on an additional interconnection of 1,000 megawatt between Morocco and Portugal. And this is just one example of a few of the things that we are doing in order to capture this moment of difficult, I would say, geopolitical relations, to push for other interconnection projects that we had in the pipeline. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. Thanks, Minister. I know that's another meeting that's waiting for you, so you have just a few minutes. Let me get back here on the stage in Rome with Minister Al-Hamdani, because you were mentioning, water scarcity, access to water as a source also for potential conflict. But how about the cooperation, the dialogue with other neighboring countries, or in general? Do you see any progress in this? And the energy transition is making it easier or more difficult to find these new agreements, these new regulations, this new pact that you were mentioning at the beginning?
يعني بالتأكيد
For sure, the cooperation that we are searching for should be built on the basis of the common of the common agreements about water and water administration. It needs a lot of coordination during scarcity, or even when we have a lot of rain. Each country should work about a roadmap for itself, a national plan, and what are they expecting, and what are their needs for the future years. For example, when we are speaking about Iraq, we updated our expectation about water sources in Iraq till year 2035, and this is the second the second update. The first one, it was to 2004, and so in order to put in place these studies, we need some help from our regional friends and from within the government of Iraq. And but everybody knows that there had been some wrong policies before year 2003, and this didn't allow our country to put in place for real what was expected in our action plan. Everybody knows what happened in Iraq in 1991 and even before, and we know that it made a lot of mistakes. We have seen a lot of wars, and so we are very late to face the challenges about the climate change. And nowadays, after 2003, we have a new challenge in Iraq. We have Daesh, ISIS, and so it blocked a lot of our infrastructure, and even destroyed a part of our water infrastructure, and it has been a big challenge for us to and we have a lot of problems in order to have cooperation with our neighbors. We have seen with Syria and Iraq, and Syria and Turkey. While with Iran we have a good cooperation. Now we have to develop better projects for our country and in our region, to have new projects for the water. So Iraq had been pioneering the agreements. We have been the first country, one of the first countries signing Paris Agreement, Helsinki Agreement, and we are always on the forefront on this. Iraq had been late for because of its wrong policies in the past, but a lot of countries with a high income didn't have our problems, so they had been going on with their projects. But they had their own wrong policies, for example, toward Iraq, and they didn't respect even the international laws related to the rights of all of the people. So Iraq now, for sure, would like to accomplish its goals to 2030, and we are working to have a better agricultural sector. But we know that war is destroying everything. Water had been a weapon of war during the war. Even Daesh, ISIS had used this water and water scarcity in order to take control of entire region. So now we opened a new a new way of cooperation with Turkey and several other countries in the area. We when we have common source of waters, we need to sit together and to face our challenges together.
Have the Jordan point of view on this, so international cooperation through energy transition. Minister Al-Aradaida, what can you add to the discussion here?
Well, I agree with a lot of the points that my colleagues had mentioned, and primarily turning what sounds like a calamity into an opportunity. And we got to see the silver lining in what's happening nowadays. And the discussions in Glasgow really touched on many of these issues and how to accelerate the transition into renewables, and as well as the necessity of collaboration across borders. And it is absolutely true that water knows no boundaries, and greenhouse gases know no boundaries, but at the same time, collaboration should know no boundaries. And when it comes to Jordan's case, turning this challenge into an opportunity, we're blessed with a visionary leadership and also a mature regulatory framework that enables us to accelerate the move towards renewables, more renewables, and at the same time finding solutions for some of the challenges, environmental challenges that we're facing and about to face. We have an enormous opportunity. We are in the solar belt of the world. We've got great irradiance in large swaths of the country. So that creates opportunities for collaboration. And we also have an opportunity to rearrange our energy portfolio, to look at what else can we do in the regulatory framework, and at the same time, how do we increase and upgrade the capacity for more uptake of renewables. We are currently at 25% of our electricity coming from renewables and aiming to increase that significantly. There are great opportunities in retrofit, and the IEA mentioned that efficiency should be the first source. So demand management, there are great opportunities. There are opportunities for collaboration with neighboring countries and beyond on new technologies and implementing these technologies on a local and countrywide level.
All right.
And waste management, turning waste from a problem into an opportunity is also there. Waste to energy and circular economy, increasing the uptake of electric vehicles is also part and parcel of the energy transition. And all of the other things in green hydrogen that you probably know that Jordan is entering into, and the smart agriculture and the national conveyor project in desalination and reforestation. So all of these have been encapsulated in Jordan's nationally determined contributions, and increasing that to 31% by 2030, but relies heavily on contribution and collaboration with international entities.
Right, right, Minister. Thank you so much. Now, Francesco La Camera, and ladies and gentlemen, we have to wrap it up a bit, but we are talking about the power of renewables, and here the Minister was talking about sun. We know at COP20
Faizan,
because the connectivity, you know, and new transmission lines and so on, international projects are another form of cooperation that is badly needed. What do you make of that, and how do you work on this kind of level?
Yeah, there are two areas when we talk about cooperation. One has been said is a regional aspect, and I will come to this answer directly to your question. And the other is concerning collaboration north-south. Concerning the regional cooperation, the grid aspect, I think, is crucial, because we have to work on a regional basis to ensure that we can exchange electricity among countries. So there will be a way to better integrate country for a more peaceful world in some way, and make possible to mitigate the variability of renewables. So complex system where we have storage, we have interconnectivity, flexibility, smart grid is a way for organize the regional organization, the regional cooperation. And we have always in mind that when we talk about cooperation, we have to look to the future. Yes. Because the cooperation for the future will be different than the cooperation in the past. And the grid is a crucial aspect, and this is the reason for having our General Assembly next January, one ministerial dedicated to the question of the grids. The other aspect is related to developed country and the role of fossil fuel. And we make clear in our theory of change. The Polar Star is obviously the IPPC, scenario 1.5. So we have to stay, if we want to say that we are serious with 1.5 degrees, we have to stick with the trend that are there in that report. Okay, that's clear. At the same time, we are coming soon with a study where we show very evident that developed countries that are basing their economy on fossil fuel will be very damaged by the energy transition if there will be not there a strong support by the developed country. So cooperation in that context between developed and developing country, especially for the developing countries that will come out with the energy transition, cooperation must be there, because if this will be not there, as has been said by the ministers, that it will be a very serious menace to the energy transition. And having the pleasure to meet ministers that have met in Glasgow as the Jordan minister, as a minister here, said that Arena is always ready to work with you in all the way.
Are you concerned that high oil prices, high gas prices might depress investment in renewables looking ahead? In a word.
Not at all. Not at all. No? You know, sometime, you know, I'm already 40, so I have 40 years. I'm 40-year-old, perhaps a little, but some year more than that. But it's enough to have the experience that volatility, price, does not belong to the renewables. It's belong to an old fossil fuel wars.
Joseph, what's your take on this?
Well, there's a lot of capital chasing renewable energy because of the growth potential and the necessity for it. As I said, we have to, if I can use a phrase that President Biden likes to say on different topics, that we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. I like to say we have to walk and chew carbon at the same time. We need to, you know, continue on the transition, but we need to, you know, also find ways to use carbon and use it more cleanly. I'd like to plug two things, though, in response to this second question, and that's one, to mention the IPCC report. One of the technologies that it focused in on was carbon capture, use, and storage. And this is a technology that, in my view, and I think in the IPCC's view, is really crucial to meeting our climate goals. And it's especially necessary in hard-to-abate sectors like steel and cement and even aviation and shipping. And think about it, as the world unlocks from COVID and the pandemic, hopefully, we're going to see a lot more growth and a lot more infrastructure spending. And all of those industries that I just talked about are going to grow. So we need to focus on this because these are going to become high emitting industries. And we need new technologies like CCUS, like hydrogen. If you can't electrify it, you have to use hydrogen. But the second thing I want to plug is Mary and her colleagues at the IEA, because they came out with the IEA technology report, which basically said half of the emissions we need to abate, to meet our climate goals, have to come from new technologies that are not commercialized or even invented yet. And this requires R&D by governments. The Biden administration is quadrupling the clean energy R&D. President Macron in France just announced his new industrial policy that also is a $30 billion investment in clean technology and R&D investment. And here in Italy, ENEA, the ENEA agency, also is doing a lot here. We need more countries to follow this leadership and invest in clean energy R&D.
Yeah, absolutely. In a flash, Joe. Last week, you predicted the actual outcome of the OPEC Plus meeting, which sticks to its plan to get to 400,000 barrels more per day starting in January. So based on your knowledge, what's going to happen to the prices in 2022? We have inflation, we have new variants of COVID with a slowdown demand. Will prices go up as they did since the beginning of the year, or down like in November, down 20%?
Well, I think you're going to see prices just in the first start of the year go down, mainly because oil prices, gasoline prices may not, because we're in the throes of the winter heating season. But in terms of oil prices, you're going to see them go down just because OPEC has taken action to have more supply. But the first quarter, Mary Warlick and her colleagues at the IEA and other forecasting agencies predict that there will be a big surplus in the first quarter of next year. But essentially, the economy is going to recover eventually. And I think it's going to surpass 2000. I think we're already surpassed 2019 levels. And that's with aviation and jet fuel demand not coming back normalized. So I see much more demand and not enough supply in next year. So I see us entering a period, not just next year, but the next several years of elevated prices and volatility.
Yeah, Mary's Bruce Warlick, what do you see at IEA? And having said that, what do you see as a cause of this crisis in the energy prices that we're seeing? Because many think that it's the lack of investment in traditional fossil fuels that, pushing prices up. Is that true in your vision or not?
Well, thanks very much. I'll try to be really brief here. Just in terms of the dynamics of the crisis, as we've said, we think it's inaccurate to lay any of the blame at the door of the clean energy transition. Quite the reverse. We think that the investment in the clean energy transition needs to very much be accelerated, as some of the other panelists have already indicated. In terms of causes, very strong economic rebound, which has just been mentioned. We see the global economy, it's on track to grow by around 6% this year. It's the fastest recovery in 80 years, so very strong demand ramping up. There were all kinds of weather factors that played an important role in terms of the impact of energy supply and also planned and unplanned outages. And annual investments in oil and natural gas have actually fallen sharply in recent years. That's contributed to the challenge as well. But as I said, at the same time, governments simply have not been pursuing strong enough policies to scale up the deployment of clean energy sources as solar and wind as much as they need to. So while there's good progress being made, it's still not enough progress to offset the potential volatility that we're seeing now. We really encourage further dialogue between producer and consumer countries. That's something the IAF is very much focused on, I know, and we really want to acknowledge too the leadership of the Italian government under its G20 presidency and its focus on the energy transition and energy security issues. But once again, accelerating the implementation and the pace of clean energy transitions, with a particular focus too, as has been mentioned, in emerging and developing economies, where, as you indicated, the cost of capital is much higher. So these are all wake-up calls, I guess you would say, in terms of the push for faster acceleration and pace of the transition.
Well, thanks again for that, Mary Bruce Warlick, and thank you. It was a privilege having this conversation with Minister Al-Andami, Minister Benali, Minister Aradaida, and also Francesco La Camera and Joseph McMonigal. I understand that there will need change, as Francesco and Minister said, but it will be challenging. It will be costly, but as they say, the cost of not changing will definitely be higher. So thanks for listening and good continuation with Med here in Rome. Thank you.
Grazie, Andrea.